They took the worst of mankind and made of it something bright and true. Here's a look at McFarlane Toys, Warhammer 40,000, the Blood Angels Reiver Sergent. The Blood Angels, noble space marines, are known for their ferocious red thirst and black rage psychosis. They excel in rapid strikes, but the Reivers take it to the next level, launching brutal assaults with sudden fury and shocking violence. They serve as terror troops, sowing fear and confusion among their foes. The moment you instill fear is the moment you win the war. Just before we get a closer look at the McFarlane Toys Warhammer 40,000 Blood Angels Reiver Sergent, I'd like to thank the folks over at McFarlane that provided the sample we could have a look at. The figure, though, of the Reiver is going to stand at 7.5 inches in height, or Reiver Sergent is going to stand about 18.5 centimeters tall. We have looked at a few Warhammer 40,000 figures in the past, so to compare along with the Reiver Sergent, let's bring in a couple right now. Here's first what the figure looks like with the Space Wolves Wolf Guard, and here's as well what the figure looks like with the World Eater's Khorne Berserker. Along with having many weapons to wield, the Reiver Sergent comes included with a trading card and display stand. Looking though at the card first, it features on the front the Blood Angel symbol. Before I flip it around to the back though, one thing I want to mention though about the card is it feels a little bit thicker than regular DC Multiverse cards. Could very well just be me. On the back though, it does have Blood Angels and a nice substantial read you can read for yourself for the Reiver Sergent. If you don't want to read it though, that's fine. I've actually already beaten you to it. I read it at the beginning of this review. But again, if you want to pause it, you can read it for yourself. I'll be putting this though along with the rest of my Warhammer 40,000 cards. I kind of keep them separate from my DC Multiverse cards. We'll just be putting those in the sleeves in a second. Figure, of course, yeah, comes included also as well with a display stand. It's nothing really different at all from the DC Multiverse display stands, other than the fact that placed on the bottom, we've got the Warhammer 40,000 symbol. And of course, this can plug into either one of his boots. I would always really recommend it, especially for figures big and bulky like this. It's always really good to use a display stand. Have those always on the ready if you want to put these figures in more interesting poses than just having them standing straight like this, kind of like the capital A. Would it be a capital A or I guess a somewhat short-looking capital M? Either way. The figure, though, comes included with a backpack. The backpack actually plugs on his back via this provided rectangular peg. If you look at the back of the Reiver Sergent, there's a slot here on the back, very similar, in fact, to the Wolf Guard. And Wolf Guard had it, and also as well the World Eater's Khorne Berserker. But basically, you just take the peg on the provided back, just fit that into the slot provided on the back of his body, and just basically fit in place. These are never the easiest thing to get in. You kind of have to put your pressure on the back of this to push this all the way in. And of course, once you get the backpack on their backs, it makes them for a little bit more of a back-heavy figure. So yes, keep those display stands on the ready. Something else he comes included with as well is a very large knife. All of these weapons have been molded here in silver plastic with some additional black added to, like the guns, for example. But the knife itself is a really nice, substantially large blade. It's pretty soft, though, in plastic. You can either fit this into his hands, or if you really wanted to, there is one storage space that, unlike all the other guns, at least for the knife, there's a place you can store it on the figure. He has this sheath on the back, although if you look at from the front, actually, we'll do this first. Take the sheath, and you'll take the knife and slide it into the back. It slides fine, but unfortunately, though, you can see right in the middle there, you can easily see how they haven't finished the inside of the sheath. So the knife becomes very visible on the inside. It's kind of looks a little out of place. But he does also as well come include some guns. Now, the guns themselves, if I can get the figure here just to stand here for a second, does come include with a grapple line gun. Again, all of these, have been painted in silver, but you can see some additional black's been afforded to them as well. The hook on the front is non-removable, so it's all being molded as one piece. The figure as well comes included with the bolt gun, or the bolt pistol. The pistol is fairly small in size, but the handles are actually about the same size between them. And obviously this just has a little bit more texturing onto the front of it for the grip. But the handles are of equal size. The figure also as well comes included with either the bolt gun or the storm bolter. I think it's actually more closer to being the storm bolter. It again is molded nicely here in silver plastic with a little bit of black there on the front. The black, though, does mute things by adding more matte black as opposed to... honestly, I'm surprised that they didn't decide just to make this more of a shinier black to kind of go with the motif of everything else kind of having a reflective surface to it. But anyways, again, you can take the storm bolter, and again, it can plug into his hands. The unfortunate thing about with any of these figures that we've looked at from the Warhammer 40,000 is that the plastic that they use for the hands is always really hard. I would always really recommend, if you're having a hard time to get the guns in their hands, always heat the hands first in hot water. I've already done that, though, although looking at this now, I probably should have heated it up again just before hitting record. But you can kind of also just take the gun and just start from the top and dowel your way until it all goes all the way through. The unfortunate thing, though, about the gun is not only is it difficult to get into his hands, but once you get it into the Reiver Sergeant's hands, this seems to be something that's consistent with the Warhammer 40,000, is that they have, at least for the ones I've looked at, really loose shoulders. So while you could, in theory, have the bolt gun in his hands, he doesn't seem to have enough strength in his shoulders to hold it upright. I don't think it's necessarily too heavy, but it could more just be the case that they've made the joints way too loose, and I haven't really had to figure out the packaging for very long at all. Take the bolt gun out of his hands, we'll just put it off to the side. And getting a closer look, though, at the Reiver Sergeant, one thing I really like, though, is the head sculpt on this. Having sort of more of a skull motif on the front for his mask. The neat thing about it, though, is it kind of reminds me of a Morton Joe from Fury Road. Nice color overall for they've done the figure. You've got a mohawk there to the top, some little bit of circuitry added there to the side, little plugs and everything else that he's augmented his face in. Nicely been done there as well. I feel like almost looking at the face, it does almost in a way look like there needed to be a little bit more paint. I don't know. There's something about the face where I feel like I can almost even see like the color of the plastic underneath, and it might maybe more just be my eyes playing tricks on me. I think overall, like, the head sculpt is really good, but there are a few admitting areas on the figure that I think could have really used a lot more paint. Head sculpt is good, though. I do like the head sculpt. You got the symbol there of the skull and the crossbones, of course, with the knives on either side. That's a really nice touch. You've got some grenades there on the side. None of these, by the way, are removable, so don't try to rip them off, whatever you do. Sculpting overall on the body is good. You sort of start with an underbody of black, and then they basically put the armor pieces over top of it. Large shoulder pads there on the sides. Again, there are a few little areas where I feel like the symbols, you can see there's a little bit of bleed of the black going through. You probably could have maybe gone in there and touched that up just a little bit. You could also say, too, that obviously the armor that they're wearing, too, is maybe seen a little bit battle time. So maybe you could justify why these be a little bit more worn off. But I just think that a little bit of paint could have gone a long way. He's also got, of course, the symbol there on the other side as well. These have a little more scratches, but I can kind of get away. I can give it a little bit of an excuse, just because, again, like if this guy's going into battle, some of these probably would have been scraped off in the process. Again, it's a nice looking figure, but there are a few little admitted areas where I just feel like the paint doesn't quite sell it as well as it should, like especially on his knee. It doesn't look, maybe like the shoulder pad doesn't look as bad as the knee, but the knee definitely should have really used a lot more yellow than what they did. It's a very clunky, bulky looking figure. He's got some pockets there on the sides, longer pockets likely for ammunition, some slightly smaller pockets maybe for a medic pack. A couple pockets there also on the sides, and he also has some pockets on the back. The problem, though, with adding the backpack to his torso like this is the moment you start to swing things around, he's going to come really close in quarters. In fact, he's going to hit it a couple of times, the handle for the knife. So if you're planning to rotate this guy around, you just want to be careful that you don't hit the knife. At least the knife is soft plastic. If it was a harder plastic, you probably have a little more worries to worry about. But my biggest worry, honestly, is that if moving this around, if it happens to snag the handle of the knife, I would worry that the sheath may rip off in the process. Luckily, it hasn't happened just yet. But for the articulation, though, for the Reiver, let's start first with his head sculpt. Head's going to be on a decent ball joint. Really good, actually. And also flipping this around, you get the chance to see there's just as much work done to the back of the figure that there is to the front. Head, though, rotates all the way around. You can have the head. I would normally have said looking down, but that's basically as much as it's going to cut it. The head looks a lot better up, but I mean, having it looking down, this is as far forward as it's really going to get. It does also rock back and forth, too. There's an upper torso ball joint for the figure. The Reiver Sergeant also has a ball joint at the base of his abdomen area, so you can rotate it there as well. Now, again, when it comes to these arms, the shoulder pads, the way they've designed these, are essentially pegged in place. It's a ball joint, so you can actually independently move these around if you wanted to, but at least they're out of the way. They're also giving you just enough that you can pull off about 45 degrees on the arms. They're going to be a little more limited just because there's so much more stuff and bulk going on for the tops of the shoulders. You can at least rotate the arms all the way around. My biggest, though, takeaway is the fact I just feel like these arms, especially for the figures I've looked at so far, Wolfguard had this problem. I think also Khorne Berserker also had this similar issue, where I just feel like, again, like a lot of it may have to do with the fact that you're adding shoulders over top, shoulder pads over top of the arms. You're also giving them then the responsibility of holding guns in their hands. I feel like maybe that's just asking too much of these shoulders, that the shoulders just seem a little loose on these figures. There is, though, a bicep swivel. The figure also does have a double hinge on the elbow, which I was really kind of surprised to see. I really shouldn't be, because I think up to this point, all the other Warhammer 40,000 figures have all had double hinges on their elbows. Hands do, again, rotate also all the way around. For the legs themselves, they split, and the way that they actually design these is, even though there is a lot going on here for the belt, these are at least separate from everything else around it, so it doesn't seem to hinder at all, even really for the fact he's got these pockets also on the sides for his legs. Does it at all give any conflict when it comes to having the legs hinge out like this? You can bring them forward, you can bring them back. There's a bit of a mild swivel there at the top of the thigh, double hinge also on the knee, which again, like for the size of these figures, really impressed the fact that they managed to pack double hinges on the knees, double hinges on the elbows as well. For the feet, they move back and forth, although looking at them, obviously you can know there's a little bit more limitations working with these. They move up and down, sure, but you know, with the hinge being only this much to work with, you really can't get a whole lot of range with the ankle, but it does do a job pretty decently. The figure also does have toe articulation. As already alluded earlier in the review, the figure does have pegals on the bottoms of his feet. Although, one thing I did notice, though, with the pegs is that they seem to be a little bit smaller than the peg holes seem a little bit smaller than the pegs provided on the display stand. So if you look and put this guy onto a display stand, you really have to fight to get them on there. All in all, though, it's a good-looking figure. I mean, the biggest thing, unfortunately, when it comes to the Warhammer figures is just the bulk of their size. When you're getting a figure that's bulky like this, it's going to cause conflict with the figure standing up properly. You're also adding some additional weight to the shoulders between the shoulder pads on the arms, and then the fact that you're also giving them, again, the duty of holding then the guns. The Storm Bolter, for example, or any one of the bolt pistols, or even just a hook gun, for example. Any one of those could cause then problems with the figure properly holding it, because now you're adding weight to that, which the arms themselves were already loose to start off with. It's just one thing that going back and having these on display, I've done it actually a couple of times with some earlier figures, maybe not necessarily the Warhammer 40,000, but maybe it may need the case of going in there, stiffening up the joints, just so in fact the Reiver Sergeant can properly hold his guns. I knew I was going to forget something. One good thing about the articulation also for the Reiver Sergeant is that he has a collar piece where his head attaches onto that. The collar also seems to have its own independent swivel, so you can even move the head even further up just because it's got that additional piece inside, rooted inside the top of his torso. You can kind of maybe even see it the way the figure's spinning around right now. The black part on the inside collar of his armor, that actually does have its own independent articulation. Whew. Included that. Now the figure, of course, does come included with the display stand. Always really recommend when it comes to displaying the Warhammer 40,000 figures, whether it be the Reiver Sergeant, whether it be the Khorne Berserker, or the earlier looked at Space Wolves Wolfguard. All of these figures are pretty bulky in size, and bulk also adds to weight. The weight of the figures are just usually too large, especially if you're going to have them in running poses or somewhat. That's the closest thing I could pull off with a figure of this size, somewhat of a running pose. Yeah, you definitely would want to use a display stand to pull off a look like this. At least for right now, the figure has the means to hold the Storm Bolter, or is it the bolt gun? Either way, the figure has the means at least to display it right now. But if you want to have the arms pointing straight forward, unfortunately just the weight of that plastic in the gun is just too much for those poor shoulders to bear, and a lot of times the arms just droop down. As he is right now, he's fine. If I wanted to have the arms any further up from this, that's where I start to suffer, or that's where the figure starts to suffer when it comes to displaying that a little bit better. Overall, though, I like the look of the figure. There are a few little points, of course, when it comes to paint that probably could have been touched up a little bit more. But all in all, though, I think it's a pretty nice-looking Warhammer 40,000 Reiver Sergeant. Big thank you once again to the folks over at McFarlane Toys that, of course, did come through and provide the sample of the Blood Angels Reiver Sergeant that we had the chance to have a look in this review. Have you been picking up any of the Warhammer 40,000 figures? Let me know down below in the comments section which ones you guys have grabbed. If also you guys wanted to, and not that I want to push you in that direction, but if you guys enjoyed this video, throw it a like. Why not? If you guys want to stick around for more. I hope you want to stick around for more, because we will also be looking at a couple of other Warhammer 40,000 figures. Among other things, of course, we're always looking at new McFarlane Toys reviews. Hit that subscribe button down below. Turn on the bell notification. That's step 1, step 2 process to ensure that you're always going to be in the know whenever new videos pop up. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.